Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. It's Barry Jones, Standards Plus History Academy. It is Monday morning, the beginning of another week. And we are going to tie up in a bow today the S Force, which is what we've been discussing. And a couple pictures I want to, of course, it's the same question. We've been dealing with the same question, and this will be our third iteration of that. Which question was, what was Nixon's deepest secret? And in part one, we dealt with the creation of the S Force because Nixon wanted to win the 1960 election. And he thought what would help his case is if he could assassinate Castro before the election. It did not happen. When we get to the conspirators portion, which is coming, I promise you it's coming, we will talk about why there was not an attempt by the S Force on JFK's or Castro's life before the election. That was the whole point of it. And if you'll notice, there were some attempts, but as far as the triangular fire team, there was not a successful attempt anyway. As far as we know, there were some attempts, but they were never consummated. By that, what I mean is they went to the island, but the attempt never happened. And we'll talk about that because there's a reason. Loyalties get split, they get divided, and agendas come into play. So we'll talk about that later. But anyway, that was his point in putting this thing together, was to try to assassinate Castro before the 60 election. And then in part two, we talked about how when Watergate busted open and Nixon began to realize whose names were being, who was being arrested at Watergate, alarm bells went off in his head as far as who they were and what their backgrounds were. And the realization was the same people who did Watergate 11 years earlier did Dallas. And so now panic sets in about covering all that up. It's not so much about covering up Watergate as it is about covering up the check that was in Bernard Barker's pocket, led back to the Mexico City Bank. It was about covering up E. Howard Hunt, the very sensitive covert projects further south of the border where they did the training for the S Force. Because it was all going to lead back to the Bay of Pigs, which if you have followed these episodes, you know that it was his code, according to Bob Haldeman, for the JFK assassination. So I even was able to name the 8 individuals that were from the original S Force that were in Dallas, and then the 5 individuals from the original S Force that were in Washington at Watergate, and the 3 individuals that were at both, which was E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, and Virgilio Gonzalez. All right, so I've got 2 pictures here. We're going to tie this up today, this part of the topic. Obviously, these are not new pictures. The top one is Dealey Plaza. The bottom one is a compilation of, you see the Watergate complex. You also see the 5 burglars and E. Howard Hunt pictured. And what we're going to do today is establish a very firm connection, I believe, between the two and how one led to the other because it was the same people. And of course, Nixon knew this from the outset. He was trying to cover all this up or contain the FBI so it wouldn't come out. I've got circles on the bottom picture of the 3 people that were at both. Virgilio Gonzalez's top circle on the left, Frank Sturgis' top circle on the right, and then E. Howard Hunt at the bottom. So that's what we want to look at today. And of course, we start with the actual event itself that got all this started, which is how we began this topic to begin with, which was the Watergate investigation. We are now fast forwarding to 1972. We've dealt with everything that happened in Dallas and who was there. We've dealt with the S Force, who was there. So we fast forward to 1972, and Nixon's back in power now, because when all the S Force was put together, you got to remember the expectation was Nixon was going to win the 60 election. And whatever happened over the next 8 years was going to be covered up by the fact that the guy who started this assassination team is now the president. So everything was covered. Remember, Santos Trafficante wouldn't even put the S Force together unless Nixon was there or a representative of Nixon was there at that meeting at the Fontainebleau. That's when Sheffield Edwards showed up, chief of security from the CIA. When I say the S Force, by the way, I essentially mean the CIA. I mean, these, as head of the 5412 committee, when he's putting this stuff together, Nixon, who was the vice president, is head of this. That 5412 committee was a subcommittee of the CIA. So all these covert ops are CIA. They're just covert. And that's how he's putting this all together as the covert head of the 5412 committee. So anyway, we fast forward to 72, and Lawrence O'Brien has been appointed chair of the DNC. Now, that is obviously going to catch Nixon's attention for reasons that we've covered. I believe we've covered it exhaustively in previous episodes. He is very concerned about O'Brien, what he knows. He has a lot of respect for him as far as a political saboteur. He said he's an expert in political gamesmanship. And of course, he knows that O'Brien has been very connected to Howard Hughes for the past 20 years as his chief DC lobbyist. And he's best friends with Robert Mayhew and columnist Jack Anderson, who has been a thorn in Nixon's side in 2 previous elections. We talked about the 52, and he wrote the story about a slush fund. He wrote the story in 56 about the $205,000 loan Howard Hughes gave to Nixon's brother. And these Hughes stories that Anderson's always writing have hurt Nixon politically. Nixon believes it's why he lost the 60 election. I don't happen to agree with him, but he believes it. And now he's in primo position to do him again in the 72 election. If Mayhew decides to spill his guts, or to either O'Brien or Anderson, or just one of them, who will then transfer it on to Anderson. It doesn't matter. If this gets out, if Mayhew spills, Nixon's in trouble, and he knows it. And it's not just about the financial stuff. Since the $205,000 loan, there's been $250,000 cash payments to Bibi Rebozo on behalf of Nixon and the slush fund. So there's money, there's this S Force, there's plenty of ammunition to take down Nixon. So Nixon orders his special investigative unit, we call it plumbers, to bug the Watergate complex, his office specifically, and also to search for documents. And we talked about what the public narrative of those documents was prior. We talked about how there was allegedly a call girl ledger he was trying to get his hands on, or a dossier from Fidel Castro about all the assassination attempts while Nixon was VP. And we discussed all that, but I believe it's more about this S Force than anything. And of course, if there's any financial documents about taking money, that'd be helpful to get those too. Any documents related to Howard Hughes, any documents. And of course, you're going to want to be selective in who you send on this mission. Somebody who knows somewhat what they're looking for. You don't just send anybody. And it's an election year. Anything can happen in an election year. And so Nixon sends these 5 burglars, or the plumbers, send these 5 burglars. Pictured here, I have 6 pictures here because I inserted E. Howard Hunt on the far right, but the 5 burglars are the 5 pictures on the left. The arrow indicating James McCord is pointing to the one guy who is not a Cuban, who is not an S Force member. He's unaffiliated. He's just strictly CIA. He's the implant. We're going to start day after tomorrow, I believe on Wednesday, talking about the CIA's infiltration of the Nixon world orbit and who exactly was sent to infiltrate that world. One of them was James McCord. So he is a mole. He's an infiltrator. He is a rat fucker. And we've defined that. He's a saboteur. But anyway, he's the wiretapping and bugging expert. The whole reason they have to go back and forth time is because James McCord hasn't done his job the previous 3 times. And so anyway, I just want to make special note of him. The next 4 pictures are of Virgilio Gonzalez, Frank Sturgis, Eugenio Martinez, and Bernard Barker. It's supposed to be Barker. Those are the 4 Cubans that tell the judge that they are retired or Cuban freedom fighters, and eventually reveal the true nature of their employment throughout the years, and that's been CIA. You can see this is when I say S Force, I mean CIA. The terms are interchangeable. And then on the far right, you have E. Howard Hunt, who was across the street at the Howard Johnson with G. Gordon Liddy, whom I don't have pictured because he's really unaffiliated in the ways that we're talking about. He's former FBI, but he's not S Force. He's not CIA. So I just left him out. But E. Howard Hunt is sort of in charge. He's at the command center with the walkie-talkie, and he's the lookout, and he's the key to this whole thing. So I've got their names listed on the left. So we have a total of 5 guys here who back in 60 were put together by Nixon and a whole array of people, starting with Howard Hughes and Robert Mayhew and Sam Giancana and Santos Trafficante and Johnny Rosselli and Sheffield Edge. All these people putting together this S Force. These are 5 that were original members. Now, E. Howard Hunt was not an assassin. He was a trainer, and so was Frank Sturgis. Now, Frank Sturgis there is a self-confessed CIA assassin, but for the purposes of the S Force, he was a trainer, as was E. Howard Hunt. But the other 3 were S Force members, which means they're being trained as assassins. They're also picked to participate in this Watergate burglary. I hesitate to call it a burglary. They weren't really stealing anything except documents. So we'll call it a burglary. But these guys were specifically chosen because they knew the S Force secrets that they were looking for. I mean, they've been with the S Force since the beginning. So there's no lack of familiarity as far as they're concerned. They know everything from the very beginning of this whole operation. So they are chosen. I'm sure there was a lot of other folks that E. Howard Hunt could have chosen for this operation, but he knows what they're looking for. He knows what his marching orders are. And so he's picking people that go back as far as he does. Now, remember the source for this story. I told you the story about F. Lee Bailey, the famous defense attorney, and his subordinate, Daniel Sheehan, how they were trying to represent James McCord as one of these CIA attorneys that was on retainer to represent any CIA asset who ever got caught acting domestically and needed help legally. So F. Lee Bailey is more concerned about protecting the CIA, the agency, than he is McCord. But so he needs to know the whole story. And evidently he's having trouble getting the whole story from James McCord. or whatever story he's getting from James McCord, he's not sure if he could believe it. So he goes to Santos Trafficante. He says, listen, you got to know what's going on. 4 of these guys are your guys. They're not the ones I'm representing, but they were with the one I'm representing. And so they were all doing the same thing. So I need to know what you know. And Santos sits down and tells him that story. Of course, Daniel Sheehan is in the room and taking notes. And that's where we got the story. We got the story straight from the mouth of the guy who put the S Force together. That's why they call it the S Force, named after Santos. According to Daniel Sheehan, when Santos finished telling this whole story, of course, this is the story that makes up the 18.5-minute gap, the same story that Nixon will eventually be telling his aides that he has to erase from the Watergate tapes. So it's pretty explosive stuff. And he gets finished telling the story to Bailey and to Sheehan. He stops and he pauses and just kind of matter of fact says, they're the ones who killed the president. And he's talking about the S Force, his guys, which is why, it gives, I think it lends a lot of credibility to his story because he's incriminating himself. Now, he understands that there was attorney-client privilege, and that's probably why he's spilling his guts here. But nevertheless, he says they're the ones who killed the president. And with respect to why they did it, he says it's because they were mad at JFK. He betrayed them. He betrayed a lot of people when he canceled all of the operations against Cuba. He had made promises. And then after the Cuban Bay of Pigs, he made another promise to Khrushchev that he couldn't keep. So he lied to Khrushchev. He kept Operation 40 going as Operation Mongoose. Went down to the Orange Bowl, promised to continue to try to get rid of Castro. And then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he completely changed his mind. This time, he made promises again. But this time, instead of breaking the promise to Khrushchev, he kept that promise and broke the promise to all the folks interested in getting rid of Castro. So that would be obviously the Cuban population down in Miami, the refugees, be all these fringe groups that had been put together by the CIA to be a part of Operation 40 and later Operation Mongoose and later the S Force, like Alpha 66, for example. Obviously, it violated a promise he'd made to the CIA to get rid of Castro. And as we'll find out when we get into the conspiracies, it violates a promise, a secret deal he made with the mafia. So he makes a lot of enemies and he betrays them in the end. He double crosses them. And there are some people in this world that you can double cross, and then there's some people you can't. And the people that you can't happen to have their hands on the levers of an entity called the S Force that could take its ultimate revenge. And so according to Santos Trafficante, that is exactly what happened. All right, so let's make the case here beyond what I've already done, beyond what we know from what Santos has told us. Let's make the case that the S Force was involved in the JFK assassination. We already know they were involved in Watergate. Okay, let's stipulate to that. It's the same guys. They got caught. They were arrested. There's a record. But they weren't caught in Dallas. But there's a lot of clues. There's a lot of clues. And it starts with this guy, William Harvey. What a character this guy is. There's a really good movie. If you want to get a kind of a Hollywood version of William Harvey, it's called The Company. And it goes through a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about. A lot of these covert ops throughout the years, William Harvey's role and all of that. It's a long movie. I think there's several parts to it, but it's really, really good. It's called The Company. Harvey was an assassination specialist. That's what he did. That was his role in the CIA. He was the commander of an operation called ZR Rifle. which is a CIA operation that recruited criminals in Europe to conduct assassinations for the United States. He was a long time head of that. He was also involved in executive action. By the way, we know all this not because Harvey said it, but because anybody told us. It's because in 1975, in the church hearings, we got access to the internal CIA documents. They call them the family jewels. And it was right there. So he's leading ZR Rifle. He was also involved in executive action, which was a CIA operation to remove foreign heads of state, mostly Latin American foreign heads of state, by coup, by extraordinary rendition, which means you set them up to be assassinated by their enemies, or by outright assassination. However, whatever means necessary. Executive action. He's also the guy, according to documents, who arranged the meeting. This is not the same meeting. It's a different meeting at the Fontainebleau. Evidently, the Fontainebleau is the place to be. You're going to hold a secret meeting, covert meeting, March 12th, 1961, during which CIA operative Jim O'Connell gave poison pills and $10,000 to Sam Giancana, Santos Trafficante, Johnny Rosselli, and Robert May. It's the same people. It's just a different CIA rep this time. It's not Sheffield Edwards. It's Jim O'Connell this time. And he's got poison pills and $10,000 cash to give to the guys who do the dirty work for the CIA, which is the mob, so they can sneak this, smuggle this into Cuba to their person there, get it in his food or whatever, to kill Fidel Castro. So this, again, is just another indicator. Remember, all these, this is what Fabian Escalante is having to defend against. All those 600 and some odd attempts, the United States government tried to kill Castro. He's defended against a triangular fire team. He's defended against poison pills. There was a case where we gave him a gift of a scuba diving suit that had poison in it, laced with some kind of poison. We were trying to get his cook to put poison in his food, or his strawberry milkshakes. I mean, we got real creative with it. So Fabian had to be real creative with his defense, trying to keep Castro alive. Pretty interesting. During this time, William Harvey wrote a series of memos which appeared in those family jewel documents about the S Force specifically, which prove the existence of the S Force. Here is a CIA guy who's really, his only job is assassination. That's the point of his existence within the CIA. And he is writing memos about this S Force, which corroborates Santos Traficante's story, but it also proves his involvement with the S Force. He's keeping tabs of their training, the expenses, just matter of fact, doing his job. And this is another entity charged with assassinating Castro, so why wouldn't he be involved? According to E. Howard Hunt, quote, Harvey was a ruthless man who was not satisfied with his position in the CIA. We'll talk about that in just a second, especially come Dallas. By that time, he's not only not satisfied with his position in the CIA, he's very unhappy with the Kennedy brothers. You'll see why in a minute. Anyway, he's very unsatisfied with his position in the CIA and its government salary. He definitely had dreams of becoming CIA director, and LBJ could do that for him if he were president. LBJ would have used Harvey because he was available and he was corrupt. So we have a motive. According to Hunt, who was S Force, Frank Sturgis, who was S Force, and David Morales, who was S Force, were recruited by Bill Harvey for this special operation in Dallas, which is the Howard Hunt calls it the big event. Everybody has a code for it. Nixon called it the Bay of Pigs. Hunt called it the big event. They're all talking about the same thing. It's the JFK assassination. Also, according to Hunt, again, he's S Force, Harvey, who was S Force, and David Morales, who was S Force, then went and hired the sharpshooters to kill JFK and transported the weapons to Dallas from Miami. Now, when we get to the sixth investigation in this particular topic that we've been discussing related to the JFK assassination, the sixth investigation deals with a civil lawsuit involving a woman named Marita Lorenz. And Frank Sturgis is involved, Hunt is involved. It's all the same characters, but Marita Lorenz is different. And she tells that story about transporting the weapons from Miami to Dallas. She knows the story because she was in the car. She made the trip with Frank Sturgis and to the hotel room in Dallas with a trunk full of weapons. So there's all kinds of corroboration to what Hunt is saying. Interesting, John Whitten, who was a CIA investigator, when asked to comment about William Harvey, he said, quote, he was too young to have assassinated McKinley and Lincoln. That was his reputation. That's all he did. If Harvey was involved in anything, if you read anything about any CIA operation and you see William Harvey's name, there is an assassination component to that operation. I promise you. That's the only reason he'd be there. That's his specialty. Mark Wyatt, pictured here top right, was the liaison between Harvey and Italian intelligence. In other words, he's kind of like the Johnny Rosselli, who was the liaison between the CIA and the mob here in America. This guy is Harvey's liaison to Italian intelligence. You say, well, what's he doing in Italy? Well, he lost his job. Short story version is, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, loose cannons like Harvey were either fired or demoted by the Kennedy brothers in their war against the CIA. Now, you remember after the Bay of Pigs, JFK fired the top three guys in the CIA who had planned all the Bay of Pigs. It was Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and Charles Cabell. And so this is what the Kennedys did. Then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was word that, you remember now, Kennedy's made promises to Khrushchev to cease and desist all covert activities in Cuba. And he violated that promise the first time after the Bay of Pigs, so he has to make sure he keeps his promise this time, or he's lost all credibility with Khrushchev. And he gets word that guys like Harvey are still they're violating their order. And they're continuing to make trouble in Cuba. And they're going to continue. We saw this with E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis. When he shut down Operation Mongoose, they ignored JFK too. They were going to continue. JFK had to actually arrest them for violation of the Neutrality Act. Well, here's Harvey. He's not going to go along with the program. He's going to continue his own private war. And so the Kennedys removed him as commander of the ZR rifle program and banished him to Rome, Italy to serve as station chief. They thought, we're going to get you away from this Cuba situation, as far away removed as possible, where you can't cause any more trouble. This is the motive. This is why Harvey was really pissed, to put it bluntly, at the Kennedys. Kind of like Dulles. Dulles wasn't happy. Kind of like Cabell. Cabell wasn't happy. And ironically, Cabell had a brother who happened to be the mayor of Dallas, Texas. Anyway, all these people have been fired by the Kennedys or demoted, and they're not happy with them. And Wyatt, just to kind of give you an inside, another corroboration of the way William King Harvey thinks. In the short time that he had interaction with Harvey over in Italy, he says that Harvey proposed hiring mafia hitmen to assassinate Italian socialist and communist officials. So, I mean, again, this is who Harvey is. That's his solution. He has one play in his playbook. Yes, that's it. You take assassination away from Harvey. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to do. According to Wyatt, in November of 1963, Harvey traveled from Rome to Dallas. And when Harvey asked him about it, he said, "What are you going to Dallas for? What's that got to do with your job here?" Harvey responded, quote, "To look around, to look around." This is days before the assassination. He had no reason to be in Dallas, none. It had nothing to do with his job. Okay, so I think we've established the fact that Harvey was involved with the S Force. He was writing memos, he was keeping track of their training and their expenses. He's an assassination expert. He went to Dallas in the days before the assassination, and he had a motive. He was very angry with the Kennedys. Of course, when we listened first to the Watergate tapes, we found out right away who Nixon was most afraid of, and that was E. Howard Hunt. And you remember the words that he used to describe E. Howard Hunt. He said, quote, "He's the key, he's the lever. You uncover that scab, there's a hell of a lot of things." According to E. Howard Hunt, now, he kept his silence. E. Howard Hunt, after he was arrested at Watergate and went through all the legal proceedings, everything, E. Howard Hunt never said anything. He kept his silence. Now, tomorrow we'll talk about why he kept his silence, but he did keep his silence. But it wasn't like people didn't know who he was. Okay, he had a track record. He'd worked for the CIA for years. He was a longtime CIA black operator. He'd been involved with all of the anti-Cuba operations, the anti-Castro stuff. That was well documented. Again, that came out in the 70s as a result of church hearings as well. And of course, then he gets caught with the plumbers at Watergate. So now we know, and he was a White House employee. We know that because he was well, first he was in that address book in Bernard Barker's pocket, HHWH phone number, White House phone number. And then they found that he was on the roster of employees. He was a $100 a day employee consultant with the White House during the election season. So it's, even though he's not talking, everybody knows this guy's a sinister fella, and his connection to Watergate and with the White House puts, and in his long history with the CIA, you put all that together, the fact that he was a covert operator, this whole thing stinks to high heaven. The fact is, he just wouldn't talk. In fact, when people confronted him with evidence that he was in Dallas too, he would always deny it. And then on his deathbed, pictured here, E. Howard Hunt finally unburdened himself. And he invites his son, St. John Hunt, and a reporter, and he goes on the record. And they transcribe, they tape record his statement, and they transcribe it, and they film it. And basically, this is Hunt's deathbed confession. He says in 1963, he was invited to Miami by Frank Sturgis. And remember now, Frank Sturgis is that self-admitted assassin. He's also one of the Watergate Five. He said that when they got to Miami, he was recruited for a, quote, off-the-board operation by David Morales, who's a confirmed S Force member, as is Frank Sturgis, as is E. Howard Hunt. David Morales is a veteran of the CIA, of the anti-Castro operations, and he's known as a enforcer. So when you, I mean, that's clear what that means, as an enforcer, CIA enforcer. So he's an assassin. According to Hunt, Sturgis and Morales had been recruited by Bill Harvey for the operation. So he's creating a flow chart here. He was invited by Sturgis. They get there. There's Morales. Morales recruits them both into this off-the-board operation, and he tells them that this was all put in place or set in motion by Bill Harvey. And of course, what is it? It's an assassination of JFK. That's the operation they're talking about, which completely makes sense that Harvey would be in charge of it. That's what he does. He actually writes it down. They give him a 3x5 index card, and he creates this flow chart. And of course, he puts LBJ at the top, whom he said signed off on the plot, who was going to be very, very necessary for the plot to succeed, to contain it afterwards. As president, he's going to be the guy who can contain everything, Warren Commission, et cetera, et cetera. We'll go more into this when we get to the conspirators. So he puts LBJ at the top. Cord Meyer, who was the husband for a wife of that one woman we talked about, who ended up dead. The lady who was having an affair with JFK, one of the victims, witness to the JFK assassination. We talked about her in an earlier episode. Her husband was obviously a very connected CIA guy. So it goes through LBJ down to Cord Meyer, who appoints David Morales and Bill Harvey to be in charge. And they put together this triangular fire team, or this, they're going to use the triangular fire team, this S Force. And according to the flow chart that he drew up here, E. Howard Hunt said that the fatal shot came from the grassy knoll. You kind of see what he wrote there, grassy knoll. So, we have it here. Here we have, it's kind of a homespun looking document here, but it's interesting, if nothing else. And of course, Bill Harvey's name is there, David Morales. These are S Force guys. And of course, the grassy knoll, boy, that, to say that this is one of the first indications from somebody on the inside that the fatal shot did come from the grassy knoll. And so anyway, he calls it the big event. He says Harvey and Morales hired the sharpshooters. They transported the weapons to Dallas. And that Hunt's role in this was not as a shooter, but as a bench warmer, which means a ready and willing substitute should someone fall out or need to be replaced. So he was there. And so he's basically admitting that he's been lying all these years, that he wasn't in Dallas. He was in Dallas. That's how we know. Okay. That corroborates other information that he was always denying. By the way, when we get to that sixth investigation, we'll have more corroboration that Hunt was there. And we'll get to that eventually. But so that's a Miami meeting that puts Harvey right smack in the middle of all this. And S Force members, E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. But there's more evidence. The Church Committee in 1975 confirmed the CIA program ZR Rifle, Executive Action, and TWEP. TWEP stands for Termination with Extreme Prejudice. This is the methods by which these assassinations took place. And if you have followed all of my episodes, I did about 4 or 5 episodes on the cancer virus. And the reason we talked about that is because it's in the TWEP documents. Because the whole point of assassinating these people was to make it look like they died of natural causes. And they list in there cancer being put in people's food or injected into their blood as one of the means by which this would take place. In fact, there's a famous picture of Frank Church holding up what they called a cancer gun that shot darts with the cancer virus on it. They had means by which they could kill somebody, inducing heart attacks, cancer, various other, those are the 2 I know of. Termination with extreme prejudice. Termination obviously means assassination, and the ability to do it to make it look like they died of natural causes, which calls into question a whole bunch of deaths of people that appeared on the outside looking in that they just died of cancer or heart attack. Calls all those into question, especially when you consider the importance that their testimony would have played in this case. All of a sudden they die conveniently of cancer, like Jack Ruby, or a heart attack. There's several like that. For like was it Richard Case? No, it wasn't Richard Case. There was some guy we've talked about, and I can't. These names start running through I start losing track of all the names. But there was a guy who had a purple trunk, and it was Richard Case Nagel, and he died of a heart attack. And they never found his purple trunk. So it makes you start to think. Anyway, that's another issue. But the family jewels, which are the documents that James Schlesinger turned over, the head of the CIA, confirmed, in addition to all these programs, it also confirmed that the CIA and the mafia were allied together in a series of covert ops to assassinate Castro. Here you see number 2 in this family jewel list, Johnny Rosselli, the use of a member of the mafia in an attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro. This comes right from CIA documents. They're going through, this is like an index. And somewhere there's a chapter on Johnny Rosselli and all the stuff that we've been talking about, where the CIA used the mob. I mean, just like the story we just told you about the poison pills. That was the CIA money, that was CIA poison pills being delivered to Sam Giancana, Santos Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, Johnny Rosselli. These are mob guys to carry out the hit. That's a huge scandal right there. By the way, I included number 1 in here because it's redacted. It's interesting. Number 2 and number 3 are positively explosive. The mafia and the CIA working together. Number 3 is about the infiltration of the media, which, by the way, that's still to this day the only CIA program that had never had a termination date, which means it's still ongoing. Now, as explosive as number 2 and number 3 are, number 1 must be positively nuclear to redact it, and not redact 2 and 3 and allow the American people to get their eyes on that, but not number 1. Makes you wonder, what was number 1? It had to be redacted. Anyway, so let's go through some of this evidence. We already know that the S Force was the triangular fire team specifically trained to kill Castro. That's why it was put together. We already know that the S Force training involved a triangulation of fire, 3 teams of shooters and spotters, 3 locations, shooting at a moving target from distance with rifles and scopes. We've already learned that William D. Pauly asserted while on an S Force operation, sitting in his yacht, waiting for them to return from the island of Cuba, he tells Martino, who's ranting and raving about Kennedy shutting down the bases, "Don't worry, John, we're going to kill that MFer," talking about JFK. This is the S Force talking. And we already know that Richard Case Nagel has testified that Oswald infiltrated a CIA-sponsored group called Alpha 66, which was plotting to kill JFK and set up Oswald to be the patsy. And of course, we know that the S Force, a lot of those, I gave you 15 names. A lot of those 15 names were Alpha 66 members. They were all anti-Castro Cubans. We already know that the S Force had confirmed members of the S Force in the foiled Chicago plot. For example, we know David Morales was there because Abraham Bolden told us he was there. We know there were 2 Cubans who got away. So we don't know their names, but it wouldn't be a far stretch to conclude that they were probably S Force members as well. Of course, we know with Morales was Braden. I've not seen Braden's name on any S Force list, but he was definitely involved with the CIA. And he was David Morales' spotter. We already know that the following 8 names were of S Force members were in Dealey Plaza in Dallas on November 22, 1963. We've gone through that list exhaustively. What their purpose was. For example, E. Howard Hunt, we just found out, was a bench warmer. Tosh Plumman, we know, was the pilot who brought in Johnny Rosselli. Johnny Rosselli was the spotter for Charles Nicoletti, who was in the Deltex building, shooter. The assumption is these other shooters were part of the other teams that were in different locations. There are a lot of assassins in Dealey Plaza on that day. I mean, it's clear Kennedy was not going to be allowed to leave Dallas alive. And we talked in one of the earlier episodes about the different locations. The first location would have been the airport. That didn't work. Too many people, too many spectators, too close in proximity to Kennedy and his wife. Second location was Dealey Plaza. Third location was a trademark. So if they didn't get him at 1, they get him at 2. If they didn't get him at 2, they get him at 3. And of course, they got him at 2. This is the story I'm going to tell tomorrow. I'll introduce it to you in just a second here. You see pictured, this is E. Howard Hunt on the right, and that's his wife. Her name is Dorothy. By the way, Dorothy is also CIA. Quite a husband-wife combo there. But before I get to that story, we also know that JFK had wounds. If you believe the Parkland Hospital doctors, he had wounds to the front, the side, and behind. The shot in the back, the shot in the front, the neck, the shot in the side of the head. That is indicative of 3 locations. A triangulated hit with high-power rifles from distance. And of course, the target was moving. All of the S Force training is manifest in the wounds to JFK's body. Now, the government-rigged autopsy is going to try real hard to cover all that up and put them all from behind. But watch the Zapruder film, listen to the Parkland doctors. It's pretty clear he was wounded from 3 different directions. The ballistics evidence itself points to 2 different kinds, at least 2 different kinds of bullets, which indicates 2 different kinds of guns, because the headshot was a frangible bullet. All the other ones were full metal jacket. The same gun would not be producing 2 different kinds of bullets. So you know there's 2 guns, minimum 2 guns. And then there's the Hunt and Hunt story, which just a quick thumbnail sketch. In the aftermath of Watergate in 72, we're going to find out later that Hunt, through his wife, is going to blackmail the White House. And I showed you a quote earlier about that slush fund that Nixon had, how he told John Dean, when Dean told him about how much money it was going to take to keep these burglars quiet, over $1 million. Nixon said, "That's no problem. I know where you can get your hands on it. No problem at all. Cash." That was Hunt and his wife. They were extorting the White House. And boy, Nixon was happy to pay it to keep Hunt quiet. Now, eventually, there's going to be a tragic end to that whole thing, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. The fact that Hunt is able to get so much money out of blackmail out of the Nixon White House, the fact that Hunt even would attempt to do this through his wife indicates that Hunt knows that Nixon knows that Hunt is the key. And this is before Hunt ever heard any White House tape or Watergate tape. He knows he's the key. And he knows that Nixon will pay up because he knows that Nixon knows what Hunt knows. So, and then you got Nixon's own words. All of this is compiling quite a picture here. Let's re-examine Nixon's words. All right, now that we have some context and there's some background, we've gone through all of the backstory. Let's look at these words again. I gave them to you at the beginning to kind of launch us into this story. Now I want to go back over them again to kind of tie the bow on this. Remember what he said on one of the tapes, quote, "Tell them," the CIA, "if you, the FBI, allows this investigation of this particular bank account in Mexico City to get pushed further south of the border, it could trespass on some very sensitive covert projects. And since you have these 5 men already under arrest, you ought to let it just taper off at that." You remember there's an agreement between the FBI and the CIA. If the FBI's investigation ever incurs or touches on the CIA covert op, the CIA can ask or request the FBI to let it go, to back off, and the FBI will, to protect the CIA sources and methods and its covert operating capabilities. So he's essentially telling the CIA to engage that agreement. So he's ordering the FBI to back off investigating a check because he knew it would lead to the S Force. This particular bank account, it's the same bank account under the same name, Manuel Aguirre, the same bank, Banco Internacional, that paid the S Force in 60 and is now paying the Watergate burglars in 72. Nixon was not anxious for anyone to learn about the very sensitive covert projects further south of the border, because that would lead to Clint Murchison's ranch and what the S Force was doing there down in Oaxaca, Mexico. Another quote, this Hunt guy is the key. He's the lever. He won't cover a lot of things. Tell them, the CIA, if the FBI open that scab, there's a hell of a lot of things that come out. Tell them that we feel it'll be very detrimental to all of us if this thing goes any further. Nixon didn't want anyone looking at E. Howard Hunt's past because it leads right to Dallas. And he knows it. And the reason we know that he knows it is because look at his next quote. Quote, if this gets out, it would make the CIA look bad. And it's, quote, likely to blow the whole Bay of Pigs thing, which I think would be very bad for both the CIA and the country. Remember the scene where Senator Ervin looks up at Haldeman and testifies. What does that mean? Whole Bay of Pigs thing. And Haldeman says, whenever he spoke of the Bay of Pigs, he was talking about the JFK assassination. Whoa, that's pretty heavy. And of course, Nixon didn't want to re-examine the whole Bay of Pigs thing because it was his S Force that assassinated JFK. Rosemary Woods. They called it the Rosemary Stretch. And this was the alibi that the Nixon White House gave to explain how and why there was an 18.5-minute gap in one of the tapes. They said Rosemary, when she reached back to answer the phone, pushed the wrong button and unintentionally dubbed over a portion of the tape. When they realized that, they hit the button again and turned it back on. According to Sheehan's sources, this comes straight from Daniel Sheehan, the 18.5-minute gap in the tape was Nixon explaining the entire story that I've just spent the last 3 episodes explaining to you about the creation of the S Force, who was involved, about Dallas, and why it is so important that the FBI be controlled, where this leads. Nixon told that story in 18.5 minutes, and that's why they went back and erased it. It was intentionally erased. It was not Rosemary, poor Rosemary, throwing her under the bus. But that's what it was. So, in conclusion, and I have several conclusions here. Number one conclusion is that the S Force assassinated JFK. And since Nixon and the CIA put this S Force together, authorizing it, of course, we know Santos Trafficante put it together, but he would not have done that without Nixon and the CIA authorizing it. You remember that Fontainebleau meeting? Sheffield Edwards was the CIA rep there, and he also served as Nixon's rep. And so based on that, and Nixon's request to Howard Hughes, that's why it got put together. So anyway, that's conclusion 2. Since Nixon and CIA authorized the S Force, thus Nixon and the CIA, and I would say generously, indirectly assassinated JFK. When I get to what my conspirators, I'm going to make the case that the CIA did not indirectly assassinate JFK. It was an operation. It was a successful operation. It was intended. That brings me to conclusion 3. Since Operation 40 and S Force members, Virgilio Gonzalez, Ray Sturgis, Bernard Barker, Eugenio Martinez, E. Howard Hunt were implicated in Watergate, that brings me to conclusion, and that we know because we have pictures of them being arrested. That brings me to conclusion 4 is that the Nixon and CIA also had hands in both the JFK assassination and the Watergate scandal. Okay, the S Force was the one that did the JFK assassination. The same guys did the Watergate scandal. So Nixon and the CIA, which had its hands in the first, also had its hands in the latter. The result is Nixon had to be coaxed into resigning before a trial in the Senate. There could not be a trial. Absolutely could not be a trial. And both sides understand this. When the Republican senators go up to the White House to talk to Nixon, they know there can't be a trial. I would submit they know the story. They know where it leads. They know there can't be a trial. That's why they went and talked to him. Because at this point, Nixon thinks he can write it out. He thinks the Republican senators will stick with him. They know what is going to come out. And they're there to tell him, there can't be a trial, Mr. President. You have to resign. We're going to vote against you. But first, there's going to be, if you don't resign, there's going to be this trial. It's all going to come out. Please resign. And of course, Nixon, as he's hearing this, realizes it's going to come out. And this, I can survive Watergate. I can't survive being even connected loosely with the JFK assassination, which is obviously it's not loose. There's a very strong connection there. So he had to be coaxed, and it's not going to be hard. He's going to resign. He's going to go away pretty quietly, pretty quietly, once they deliver the bad news to him. Because he knows, I can't survive this. Washington, D.C. can't, our government can't survive this. The cover-up must continue. And of course, wink, wink, Ford will take care of the criminal trial later with a pardon. So that is the story of the S Force and Nixon's connection to the S Force and Watergate's connection to the JFK assassination. And that is why when I began really, really researching the Watergate scandal, it kept leading me back. It kept leading me back. And kicking and screaming, I went into an investigation of the JFK assassination, thinking it was a distraction, thinking I was being pulled away from what I was really interested in, which was Watergate, not realizing that Watergate was the Rosetta Stone pointing me to the JFK assassination and helping me decipher the code. And in the process of learning the truth about the JFK assassination, it helped me uncover the truth about the Watergate scandal. And it's been really, really important for me. And as I watch government operate today, to see the same patterns and the same template, the same methods and sources being used over and over and over, the same tactics. And once you have that moment, that aha moment, it's like the scales come off your eyes and you can see. And you don't buy the lie anymore. So, okay. I hope that was interesting. Like I said, tomorrow, what I always try to do is after I finish one of these this is the third investigation of the 6. And I always finish before I go on to the next one with a body count, what happens during that particular period. So we'll do that tomorrow. And then we'll begin investigation number 4 on Wednesday. And so if you enjoyed today, or if you've been enjoying these episodes or my channel, please feel free to subscribe. It is free. And hit the notification bell to be notified whenever new content drops. And the thumbs up if you did like today or any of the ones that you've watched. And feel free to check out my website, sphistory.com. Thank you. Everybody have a great day.